Welcome to Boss Up Goddess. I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, and I interview trailblazing women who share their wisdom to help us all live bigger, better, and bolder. The woman you are about to meet is one of my favorite people on the planet. Her name is TaRessa Stovall, and she is an identity equity advocate. She's a trailblazer because she made up her own title. She's also the author of 9 books, including Swirl Girl, coming of race in the USA. Fascinating, powerful commentary, and it's her memoir as well. So, welcome, TaRessa Stovall.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be here. Hey, everybody.
Thank you, TaRessa. So we met so long ago, and we have so much in common, including the fact that we're mixed race, and we've written and spoken about this for decades. You were born and raised in Seattle, then you lived in Atlanta and New Jersey, and now you're back in Atlanta. And you are an outspoken advocate of everyone being able to self-identify and declare who we are and what we do with a powerful mission behind the message. And that's exactly what this book does. You can see I've got all my little markers in it. Swirl Girl. Oh my gosh, TaRessa, can you please talk about why you wrote the book? What's the mission and the message?
Absolutely, Elizabeth. Thank you. I wrote Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA for a couple reasons. The first reason was that for many, many years, ever since I was probably a young teenager, I've been looking for a way to somehow share my journey in a way that could potentially be helpful to younger mixed race people.
Yes, yes, yes.
And what I learned as I grew older, I kept kind of waiting for, I thought somebody else might write a story that I could say, okay, they did it, I don't have to. But that never happened. And the other thing I saw was what Nigerian novelist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has so brilliantly introduced us to in her landmark TED Talk, the danger of the single story. The danger of the single story. And so I wrote the book to counteract the danger of the single story for mixed Black people specifically in the United States, that we're all confused, we live lives of rejection and misery, and we are tragic, quote unquote, mulattoes. That to this day, up until the last few years, I think we're starting with, we got Meghan Markle, Barack Obama, and now Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris takes it to a new level, by the way. But she's really the first person I've ever seen to own her and, as I like to call it. She's not letting America chop her up into pieces.
Ooh, I've chills. Oh my gosh. When you say own her, and do you mean like Tiger Woods' experience when he made up his own term and faced so much criticism for it when he was just speaking his truth?
Well, yes, but that was what, 20 some years ago,
Hmm.
and the world wasn't where it is now, and we were not ready for his word of cablination. Another difference, I think, I mean, Kamala didn't, fuse her words together like I've done for Blewish and some people do for Latino and Blasian and things, Blindian and things like that. Those weren't, that kind of thing wasn't happening when he tried to do it. The other thing was, what he did was he put CA first, meaning Caucasian. We were all like, your dad's Black, your mom's Thai. Where's the Caucasian? Not that most African Americans don't have, mixed DNA. But
Hmm.
anyway, again, it was a different time. It was a very
Right.
different time, and it was not received well. It was perceived and responded to like an erasure of Blackness, which, let's be perfectly honest, the way, it was also the way he did it. People knew, I think he was married at the time to a white woman, but anyway, it was, that's how it was, people received it, perceived it, and received it. And so nowadays, people are more open to that, but we've come a long way. We've since gotten a category on the census. We've since had a president. We now have a vice president. We have more and more celebrities, who are, so like I tell people, the only celebrity, I tell people I'm Black and Jewish, when I was growing up, the only person people had to relate to me was Sammy Davis Jr. And I was like, he's such a whole different path though. But I'm 8, 9 years old trying to explain this to adults,
Right.
and I said, my kids have, however they, they're both Black identified, but they can just say, yeah, Drake, Tracy Ellis Ross. I mean, there's dozens of household names that they could point to. So the concept of being Black and Jewish at the same time is no longer unheard of or an anomaly or anything like that. And there's also, conversely, more just general mixed race celebrities that we're aware of. So now, you know, your child, my children grow you, and they could eat however one feels about them, the Meghan Markles and the Kamala Harrises and the many, many, many other people that we're talking about. However one feels about them, every single group deserves to be represented and to have representation that shows the spectrum of who they are, and not just lock them into a narrow corridor.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I love that, TaRessa. So you start your book, and I love how you weave history to provide the context of everything that's happening. Growing up in the 60s in Seattle, you talk about the day Dr. King was assassinated. You talk about the challenges of comments kids made to you. You wrote a beautiful poem about it. And can you talk about back then how there was always this pressure to pick one side? So the openness of embracing and celebrating all parts of ourselves that we get to do today was not a reality back then.
That's really true. So we're talking about the late 1950s, the 1960s to set the stage. I'm from Seattle, Washington, the Pacific Northwest, where there were never any anti-miscegenation laws. Um, there was no overt segregation. There was covert segregation and redlining, and there had been attempts to make interracial marriage illegal, but they never made it into law. And Quincy Jones has written a lot about this because he was part of my parents' cohort. My dad was a jazz musician, not famous like Quincy Jones, but he was still part of that cohort. And Quincy Jones talks very openly about this, that there were a group of Black men, and part of the reason some of them relocated to Seattle was so they could marry white and Asian women. In my father's case, Jewish. And at that time, Jews were not yet, because they hadn't assimilated up the ladder to be widely considered white at that time. That's very, very recent in US history, just the last couple of decades. Um, so that this whole cohort of jazz musicians, and they were, for whatever reasons, many were interracially married and had kids around the same time and everything. And so that's the environment I grew up in. And what you're speaking of, that, well, two things. I grew up were mixed. There were so many mixed people just in the Pacific Northwest. Still, the Pacific Northwest, just like it is today, was predominantly largely white, and largely white, okay. And the white was Scandinavian, so that's like what I like to call super white. But but at the same time, there were enough mixed people. So literally, when I was young, very young, I wasn't really asked what I was. People would look at me and assume I was mixed, or they'd say, "You're mixed." I'm like, "Yes," and didn't ask any further questions. Mixed seemed to me, in my young experience, was completely self-explanatory. And when I got older and started going into the wider world, and I went to predominantly white schools for 10 of my 12 years of public school education. So I like to say I was forced to integrate schools, which is actually true. But but
Through busing.
well, through busing in elementary school, it was more logistical because we were poor. My mother didn't have a car, and we went to a school that was near her job, and it was I don't know how she got us in there to this day, and I'll never know. But anyway, so but the notion of the either or didn't exist. There's a couple reasons. And I know that nowadays younger mixed race people speak very disparagingly against the quote unquote one drop rule, which means if you have any Black in you, you're Black, which of course came out of slavery, was retained through Reconstruction, and of course through Jim Crow. So, and understanding that I was a good adolescent or teen by the time Jim Crow ended in the South, and there's still de facto segregation throughout the rest of the country. So, and to this day. So that the notion of one drop, like nobody ever said to me, you have one drop, you have to be Black. I knew of the concept, but it was never presented like a pressure idea. It was never presented like a form of oppression or being forced into anything. What it acknowledged, and I'm trying to work into my work today, is that no matter how you identify, how you affiliate, where your cultural allegiance or leanings lie, in the USA, if you have any discernible Black blood, you are politically a Black person.
Poli-
You are politically a Black person. It doesn't matter what you call yourself, which term you use or don't. Where you go culturally, who you identify with, that's what one drop means. That would we have been slaves? We would have been slaves. Because there were only two categories, slave and master, as evidenced by the early census categories. So slave and master. There was nothing else. And we would have been slaves, even you and I. And so, because a true Southern white person, I can tell you right now, can literally see a one drop at 100 yards. I'm not exaggerating. They have what I call the world's best race star for Blackness because they had to. Their ancestors had to. We were property. We were capital. We were the capital that this capitalist country was built on. And so they had to know that. So that's where that notion came from. That notion is just now in the 21st century, just beginning to be challenged because there's more multiracial people, number one, born of consensual relationships. There are more, and because of the digital world, there are more multiracial conversations taking place and our voices are being raised. So some of us are like, well, the one drop rule doesn't really work for me, but I still identify as Black. But the one drop rule is suddenly now, like you said, you can now, there's more of a sense of owning your and. But I want to say something else, and it might be because my mother was Jewish. And again, when I was growing up and when my mother was growing up, Jews were not yet considered white. Okay. So I realized some point, well, I'm not technically mulatto. Like Jews have kind of been on the fence for a while, assimilation wise.
So what were they considered then if they weren't considered white?
They were still ethnic. You saw how we know the kind of immigrants in large groups, Irish, Italian, Greek, etc., coming into the US. Well, the Jews, look at it this way, Elizabeth. White supremacists still target Jews right along with Blacks. They make no distinction. They're no less anti-Semitic than they are anti-Black to this day. So while I was growing up, you would hear about the country clubs, no Jews, no Blacks, no Mexicans. This is West Coast. Right. Okay. So I grew up with that. And my mother and father, just real quickly, grew up together. They knew each other. They went to school together. My father was my mother's brother's best friend in North Minneapolis, where at that time Jews and Blacks redlined, where they had to live. So my mother grew up with Black people and Black culture. My father grew up with Jewish people and Jewish culture. They grew up literally together. So I am not from two divergent cultures. Okay. And so there's a slight difference. But anyway, so the whole idea of you can claim everything, I've always been this way. It wasn't a decision or a choice or anything. I've always identified strongly Black. We were raised in an environment that was Black and mixed, but Black was the vibe. And so my sense of Blackness growing up, and this is true of some other multiracial people who were mixed Black as well. Other people have said it publicly recently, that Blackness was never defined like whiteness based on purity or exclusivity. Blackness was defined by diversity and inclusivity. And so my mother was welcomed. And so my and was welcomed. Nobody said to me, now Black people were like, well, you're Black, well, you're Black, well, you're Black. But what I realized just recently in talking about the book, so I'm half Jewish and my father's Black with a lot of Native American. And basically I look exactly like my father's mother. So, okay, a lot of Native American. So I have those three groups.
Yeah. There's beautiful photos of your family and your ancestors in this book. It's just gorgeous.
Thank you. So the last thing I want to say is, but the only one of those strains of heritage in my whole 66 years that have ever and have completely 100% consistently claimed me, welcomed me unequivocally, made a point of saying, you come on over here, sweetie, this is where you belong, as Black people. Jewish people have never done it. I'm not rejected in the Jewish community because the rules of, and they're under, they're also under review, but growing up, if you put me in a Jewish space, and I'm not going to necessarily be claimed or warmly welcomed. The question they're going to have is which parent, and that's matrilineal. Traditionally, if your mother's Jewish, you're Jewish. If your father's Jewish, you got to convert. It's still fluid. It's more fluid now, But if I meet a Jewish person now and I'm like, yeah, I'm whatever and Jewish, their only concern, they don't even care what the whatever is so much as which parent. And if
Mm.
it's like being outside a club with the bouncer and the velvet rope. If it's mother, you get to go in VIP. If it's father, you can go into the mosh pit. Okay.
Wow.
But again, there's some fluidity there. But so in my experience, the only people who cared about how I identified and overtly wanted me as part of them is Black folks.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But so what you're saying now, yes, now there is much more acknowledgement, acceptance of the and,
Mm-hmm.
as I like to call it, and more choices in how we identify. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, so that's one reason
So
I wrote the books for those reasons.
oh, I love it. I love it. You're telling your story, but you're teaching so much because there's the historical census information about how Black people were categorized back in the 1800s and before that as property and, the quadroon, the mulatto. You
All of
talk
it.
about the movie Imitation of Life in 1959 and how your mother would watch it, and it was the tragic mulatto stereotype. And you talk about so many powerful things like the little girl who asked you, you were swimming and you took off your bathing suit and she looked surprised because she thought you would be striped like a zebra under your bathing suit.
But
That
that's all
was
she
stunning.
was a child. I mean, the thing is, like I said, uh, that was the first time, she was my friend, a Black
Mhm.
girl, and that was the first time I ever had a sense of being that an awareness that somebody saw me as different
Mm.
from themselves, like so different
Mhm.
that maybe I'm not human or not the same species. I mean, I knew about the racial difference. I was always aware of it. It was always, but it didn't seem like anything other than just the fact I was not the only mixed person.
Mhm.
So it didn't, and nobody ever made a thing out of it. It wasn't something people pointed to or spotlighted or mentioned.
Mhm, mhm. And then you were growing up during really tumultuous times when Dr. King was assassinated, the civil rights movement was happening, and then the Black Power movement was happening, and Vietnam, and all kinds of things. So can you reflect about how your self-identity evolved through that period?
Absolutely. I like when I was writing the book, I came up with, I remembered a term because my two girlfriends in high school, that both Black Americans, kind of gave me a funny nickname. They call me a Black Power flower child.
I love that.
Black Power flower child. And when I remember, now you gotta, get your 60s,
Right, right.
go back. That we're sitting around with our bell-bottom jeans and our platform shoes and all the things. And we're in these jeans and with markers. And on my jeans, on one leg, I would draw a peace symbol, and the other, I would draw like the words Black Power.
Oh, I love
So,
that.
but that really, it still describes me to this day. It's a
Yes,
perfect description of me as
absolutely.
a Black Power flower child, yellow. And people are like, oh
Oh.
yeah, that's you. So how my identity evolution. So I've always known what I was. So there
Mhm.
was never any confusion or internal angst about what I was. What I realized, and when I did the analysis, because you got to understand things before you can write them for the world,
Right.
is that so I have what I call the trifecta, as do you. Okay. The trifecta. I've come to call it the Rashida Jones trifecta. But the trifecta is you're racially mixed, you're very light skinned, and you are super racially ambiguous looking. Now, there are
Mm.
some people who have one or two of those. Not all mixed people are light skinned, not all mixed people are ambiguous looking, not all light skinned people are ambiguous looking, not all ambiguous people are light skinned, blah, 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 blah. I have three, just like you do. What I
Mhm.
realized growing up so I've always known I was mixed. I've always known what I was mixed with. I don't need to take a DNA test. My mother was very good about la la la, this is the deal. Um, and that was good. What I realized was the dominant factor, and still is, and I was hoping that after I wrote the book, I didn't have to keep explaining myself to people, was the ambiguity. Because what I realized is that with the racial ambiguity is by far dominant. So being mixed was, to me, a fact of life. My lifelong struggle that I chronicle in the book, Elizabeth, was how to describe myself in a way that included my mother.
Mm.
So for a long time, what I said is I'm Black with a Jewish mom.
Oh,
I'm Black with a
okay.
Jewish mom. Because when I say I'm Black, obviously I'm mixed. But that's to let you know, that's to, as you know, I went through the whole thing where people would say, what are you? What are you? Black people. And I
Right.
finally realized were not interested in a verbal DNA rundown or the story of how my Russian Jewish ancestors came to the country. They wanted to know, as I put it in the book, where are you going to be when the shit comes down? Whose back are you going to have? What side are you going to go on? Which ironically, in these times, the racial reckoning of 2020, suddenly, and the Civil War, we've seen promised and in some ways enacted, right, in this country recently. Um, that's suddenly more than just a vague concept. I
Mm-hmm.
thought this could really, if you're forced to choose a side, which when I was growing up was more of a vague concept, but
Right.
there was still enough going on, like you said, with the Black Power movement in the North, especially, where it might come down to do you and Black. That was what Black people wanted to know.
Mm.
If there's a choice to be made, where you go, the way you look, you could potentially go over there, at
Right.
least kind of. But so where would you go? Where are your loyalties, or what I
Mm-hmm.
call allegiance? Where's your
Hmm.
allegiance fall? Right.
Yes. Yes.
So my identity was, first of all, how do I honor who I am, how I move through the world, but always including my mother. My father was, very, very barely involved. He wasn't into being a dad or anything. He was there. He and I didn't get along at all. Um, but I wanted to honor my mother and her and I've always been into accuracy and specificity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to say, well, my mom's white. I'm like, yeah, kind of. And for a while I was like, okay, but it was interesting because when I was growing up, so my Black friends, they would sometimes talk about white people because, of course, many of their grandmothers, mothers, whatever, had cleaned white people's houses. So the whole notion of white people aren't as clean as Black people, all that. And I was like, I don't know about y'all, but my mother is like OCD, get me up in the middle of the night for a hair in the bathtub. You could lick her floors. But my mother, really, I'm like, she's an OCD Virgo. And my friends would say, because they knew my mother, they'd been to her house and they'd eaten her food, and she was a great cook. They'd say all the time, yeah, but your mother's different. Your mother's different. Now, nobody was specific. They'd say, we're not talking about your mom. She's not like the white woman we're talking about. But that we were children, so we couldn't articulate it like you and I are.
Uh-huh.
So but remember what I was saying, Jews were not white.
Mm-hmm.
Jews were not, I mean, in a general categorical way, yes, they didn't have their own box in the census. I don't know how they counted who was Jewish and who didn't, but you said Jews and white people. That was the language, Jews and white people.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. I
Mm-hmm.
never heard anybody describe themselves as a white Jew till I moved back here to Georgia in 2012. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, a what? You just said you're a what? Like, I had never heard that term at all. I was like, you're a white Jew? What? What is that? Is that
So,
Southern?
TaRessa, why is it so important for us to talk about identity and decide who we are and where we fit in or don't fit in? Why does it matter so much?
That is a beautiful question, Elizabeth. I believe it matters a lot for all of us because we were born into a system that is completely built on and fueled by by white supremacy / anti-Black racism, built on what I call a Black versus white binary. This country was founded on that foundation, and it still runs on that foundation. That runs beneath everything. There are many, many, many other factors and manifestations. And yes, other people of color are also victims of racism, but at the root of it all, every single time, is anti-Black race, and it's global, by the way. Anti-Black racism is global, even in some Black spaces, okay? Because whether they've been colonized or whatever, so this is not unique to the United States, but what's unique to the United States is this country was literally built on that foundation, first with the Native Americans, were colonized and oppressed and tried to eradicate them, tried to enslave them, but they knew the terrain, so they said, okay, let us go find somebody who is visually much easier to track and identify, and B, they don't know the land better than we do. We can control them more easily. That's what this country was founded on. So we're born into this, Elizabeth. We're born into it. And one of the reasons I wrote Swirl Girl is that none of us, whether we're mixed or not, doesn't really matter. None of us are given an operator's manual. None of us is taught how to navigate this, how to interpret it, how to apply it to ourselves or each other. So we're every generation is like they're starting back at square one.
Mm.
You know.
Wow. And then there's so many changes with each generation, but what it all boils down to is what are you going to do with it? And I've always viewed myself, born in 1967, as the insurrections were occurring across the country. And my father was a former Roman Catholic priest who's with my mother, Black and Italian, racial and religious scandal as a result of their marriage. I see myself as a symbol. I was born right after the Loving versus Virginia US Supreme Court decision that legalized interracial marriage in the 16 states where it remained illegal when they were married. And also the all the changes that were happening at the time, I see myself as a symbol of the unity, and I continue to do so. But it is difficult to find your space, but my mission remains the same. And I'm just grateful because as Catherine and I were growing up, just like you, there were no high profile examples. There was no Barack Obama or Mariah Carey or Kamala Harris, nobody like that to look up and say, wow, I can be like them. It was very alienating, but it made us strong. It made us pioneer our own way as writers and storytellers to write ourselves into American literature with our
Mm.
own books. So it's really powerful. But again, what does it mean to you, regardless of what labels? What does the mission mean? Like, what's our place, our role, our responsibility?
Beautiful question. I believe, well, my mission, I'll start there. When I say identity equity advocate, my
Mm-hmm.
mission is to work in and with the mixed race space, to contribute whatever I have of value to bring to the table to help mixed race people navigate some of the things we just talked about, not have to start at square one in each generation, and have a sense of context continuity and understand that you define and own your identity and your journey. Nobody gets to police you.
Love
People
that.
will, but you got to learn to, you got to be strong enough to just let them do that and keep it moving.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that's part of my mission in service, in ultimate service. My ultimate agenda, which I'm very upfront about, is to address the existing, there are some tensions, some are overt, some are covert, between mixed Black people specifically and Black people.
Mm.
And they've been going on for 402 plus years, so
Mm-hmm.
those aren't new in any way. But there are some, you know, there's undercurrents and there's tensions. I want to do whatever I can to try to heal those so that we can come together, unify, and fight anti-Black racism together so that we're creating a world that is more equitable. Because what we also all know in the United States is anything that's made better for Black people, everybody benefits.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, I love your answer. That is beautiful, TaRessa. Wow, it's so important. So important. But I love that you're advocating to enable mixed race people find their power, strength, confidence, because there's so many forces trying to shut it down. And it's so difficult. So you can't use your gifts in the world if you're shut down, criticized, scared, afraid to speak up and speak out. So beautiful. I love that.
Thank
And
you.
you're welcome. And your book certainly does that by, first of all, getting the conversation started and also showing how you made your way and found your way. And now you are an identity equity advocate. I love that.
Thank you.
That is
Thank
so
you.
powerful. You're welcome. It's amazing the power of talk, the power
Mm,
of affirmation and acknowledgement. When I was struggling with this in college and I went to the first mixed race student meeting on campus, that was life changing. I realized I wasn't alone. Other people were going through the same angst as you described it that I was, and it was so healing, and it for me helped me find my voice. So
Yes.
I know that people must be finding their voices when they read your book and feel affirmed and acknowledged. Have you gotten that kind of feedback?
I have, and thank you very much, because that was always my goal. And interestingly, I've gotten that not just from mixed race people, but from, the new term is monoracial, which I am not completely comfortable with, but everybody's using it. So I'm flowing with it. I'm flowing with them, letting the young people lead. Um,
What does it
but
mean?
there are people monoracial. You're not married to both parents of the same race. You
Oh,
know,
okay.
I know it's biracial, monoracial. Girls, I'm telling you,
Oh,
there's a whole vocabulary world that you could swim in for hours. But anyway, we will.
swimming.
I'm serious. I'm always like, wait, what are we talking? Can we unpack? I know what. What do y'all say? I am always saying that to the younger mixed race people. I'm like, do y'all just have meetings and make up words? Like, what is this one? What is that word? Okay. Anyway, but it's also like you, I believe in the power of language. Obviously, we're writers, we're speakers, we're teachers through words. So I'm trying to keep up with it all. But what's happening is that you've got to just pick one thing is finally being publicly challenged by the collective.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
So when you were able to join that group in college, when I was in college, no such group existed. When I was in college, the Black Student Union was brand new and radical. Okay.
Mhm, mhm.
So you got to go to school, a couple years later and many years later. And you got to go to a mixed club and go, oh my God, this is so amazing, right? I was like, I mixed her, like, yeah, but you're Black. Yeah, but you're Black. Now, it wasn't a problem for me. I just wanted to bring my mom to the party because I just happened to lean back Black, as I said. But if that hadn't been the case, I would have had much more internal struggle, like but everybody's saying I'm Black, but clearly, da 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 da. And I know it makes people who affiliated all kinds of ways. But anyway, back to what you're saying, I'm getting the response. So one fun response is from some Black people who many peers of mine, Black women friends of mine, who have somewhat, I think, to their own surprise, found themselves with mixed race grandbabies.
Ooh.
And I'm like, oh, girl, I am here for you. Auntie is here. Just hook me up. What do you need to know? But I mean it. But a few of them have said they read the book that this helped them,
Oh,
and that they're
wow.
passing it on to their children who are the parents of these mixed kids, mixed
Oh
grandkids.
my goodness.
And
Wow.
that was another thing I secretly hoped could happen.
Uh-huh.
I actually when I was writing, I was thinking of some of these friends and kind of, talking to them as I was writing.
Uh-huh.
So that's really what, but yes, a lot of mixed people, some fun things, and this is humbling, and you won't face this for many 4 years, but one fun thing I get from some of the young people, I said, wow, it was really fascinating to find out what it was like to be mixed way, way, way back then. I was like, okay, you know what? That was way too many ways. And
TaRessa.
y'all, are you serious? I mean, yes, I'm old, but dang. I mean, but they made it sound like, but we can all relate. They're 20. When you're 20, somebody who's 40 is ready for the put out to pasture. But I was
Oh.
like, oh yeah, fascinating to find out what it was like, in the caveman
Oh.
days when they were riding dinosaurs. Okay. That we boomers are, we boomers are sensitive about that. We're like,
Uh-huh.
excuse me.
I love
But
you
anyway,
call yourself a bluish, meaning Black and Jewish, bluish boomer.
yes.
That is so
Bluish boomer
fun.
and Black Power flower child. I think if you know that, you really know everything about me, right? I mean, enough so that you can understand all this weirdness and everything. But I
Uh-huh.
mean, I'm like, this is who I am. And
Mm.
I wrote the book, this is how I got that way. Oh, last question. Growing up, throughout my life, many people have asked me of different races, they've said, I've never met a mixed person like you. Why are you the way you are? Now, that was not an insult. It meant I'm, as you've long known, very outspoken and really cocky about my politics and my identity and all that. And back in a time when it wasn't cool or popular.
Right.
And so people were just like, you kind of, you different, girl. Why? That was really part of why I wrote the book, because I never had an answer. Well, a lot of time when I was young, I'd say, well, my mother was just really cool, and she does get a lot of the credit. She gets a lot of the credit, but I never really thought about it, but I had to when writing the memoir, and that was one of the things I worked really hard to try to unpack, as they say, while I was in the book, in my writing of the book, was, yeah, why are you like this, TaRessa? Because apparently, I wouldn't have thought of it, but according to many, many people, you a little different. You know, you strange. You're
Oh, you're
strange.
so sweet,
But
TaRessa.
it's
So,
but it's true.
but you're amazing and you're unique and you're a trailblazer, and that's what's so awesome about you. And we actually did this book together, My Blue Suede Shoes, and also Other People's Skin,
Yes.
where we talked about hair, skin color, eye color, all that stuff. But when you became a mother, how did your own personal experience as a Swirl girl impact your mothering?
Oh, great question. So my children's father is African American. I would say he's of a complexion that gets interpreted in different ways. So I would call him light. I wouldn't even call him light skinned. I would call him on the light side of brown skin, but some people are like, he's light skinned, whatever. Hazel eyes. And so our first child, son, named after his dad, Calvin. And we were wondering when I was pregnant. I was like, because we all know with the genetic roulette, he could have literally come out anywhere on the spectrum, right?
Genetic roulette, you said.
Genetic roulette, baby, especially when you're mixed, especially when you're mixed. I mean, you don't know, like there was, and his father, Calvin, my husband, I call him, because I still love him. He's wonderful. My husband. His dad was brown skinned black man with Paul, when I say blue eyes, Paul Newman eyes. My mother had hazel eyes, right? And my husband at the time had hazel eyes. I always knew somehow instinctually that my first child would have hazel eyes, but Calvin was born, he looked like you, except for he had blue eyes. He was born with blue eyes and blonde hair and my color skin. So the genes were the dominant genes were all on vacation with him. So he came out, and for years, people didn't think he was my kid. I go to pick him up at daycare, and they'd shove all these little Italian and Puerto Rican boys at me. I'm like, no, that one. They're like,
what?
They're like, do you have, no, I mean, come on, you know what Calvin looked like. He did. Nobody. It was great when he acted up in public, because I could act like he was. I'd be like, where's your mother? Anyway, now he looks a bit, but anyway, then we have Mariah 2 years later. My daughter, she got all the dominance. So she's got as much melanin as there is among the three of us. She got it all. She's light skinned, yes, but she's not as light as Calvin and I, meaning that in a quick sweep of a crowd, she's still brown. She has my hair, dark eyes, very ambiguous looking, but never are you white, or, oh, I thought you were white or whatever. But anyway, very ambiguous looking. So what happened is I was like, well, I was not sure, again, what they were going to look like, but I felt like what I brought to the table that hopefully was of some value. I raised them, culturally Black. I'm culturally Black. Their dad's Black. In diverse environments, but still. And we talked about all these things, like I'm sure you did with, your son, all the time, very openly.
Mm-hmm.
I think about his sensitivity. So for instance, when Calvin was little and started going to school, he's still light skin, light hair, light eyes. I'm sure the way people were responding to him, he didn't quite believe me when I told him I said, you Black, you just light skinned and ambiguous looking. But I was then for the first time in my life, I was happy for the colorism, because we still have a lot of Black magazines by then. This is before the internet. We still had a lot of Black magazines, so the internet was just starting. And we got them all, Essence and Ebony and Black Enterprise and Jet and whatever. And I was, for the first time in my life, happy about the blatant, rampant colorism throughout these magazines, because I could open, and we would sit and look through magazines, And there was Maynard Jackson, who at the time was also mayor of Atlanta for the second time. And Calvin was born looking just like, I used to call him Little Maynard until my husband let me stop. He looked just like Maynard Jackson. I was like, see, somebody would think you were in his, if we went to Atlanta, like Maynard Jackson's family would probably just steal you. Like you look just like Maynard Jackson. He did.
Wow, that's really cool.
So I was able to say these people are Black. And to explain mixedness and Blackness in a way that I hoped, you'll have to ask them, they're grown now and, you know, way more articulate than me, that I hope presented Blackness and mixedness as not being diametrically opposed to each other, or somehow separate. Okay, but that lots of Black people are mixed and there's different ways, and here's how I'm mixed, this is how you're mixed, da 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 da. But you're Black, you know. So I hope that worked, but I like that. I tried to be open about, as I got older, colorism and how people were going to respond and react to them. More of a colorism than the ambiguity. How people were going to respond and react. And when they got older, we all just would trade stories about the ambiguity. Oh, somebody thought I was this today, or
right.
You know, like Mariah went to school outside of LA. I thought everybody would think she was a Chicana. I'm from the West Coast. Everybody thought I was a Chicana. 100% of the people at her school thought she was Samoan.
Oh, wow.
I was like, oh, okay. I've only gotten Samoan like twice. You guys, she said everybody thought I was Samoan. So again, you know, but these are all good naturedly exchanged, or we've been together and people thought we're all whatever, or some of us are some things. But so the ambiguity thing really does end up being dominant. Light skin, we talked about light skin privilege. They knew I was you'll like this. They knew I was what I like to call anti-colorism advocate. And one day Calvin asked me, he was probably 10, 11, 12, paying attention to some other people's skin. And you and I were on NPR, and remember all those things, talking about colorism. And he looked at me, and you could see him trying to make sense, but he said, do you hate yourself? And I thought, what a brilliant question. That's a brilliant, I mean, look at me. I should be rah colorism. Listen, look, I tell people, I've got an all access 24 karat VIP pass.
So TaRessa, will you define colorism, please?
Colorism is, and it's a subset of racism. It's global, I've learned. Colorism is basically discrimination against dark-skinned people. And the thing about colorism that's a little bit different than racism, although it spawns from racism, is that colorism within communities of color, and I have yet to learn of any place on the globe where it is not present, right? Any place on the globe where it's not present. I haven't been everywhere, but every place I've ever been, it is very blatant and very present. And so what it means is the more European white you are in appearance, the higher are you up on the ladder or the scale.
Or privilege.
Okay. Privilege, but you and I are Black. My kids are Black, but we're going to get privilege. We're going to even get privilege from Black people in Black spaces. The thing about colorism is it is deeply internalized in all of us.
Right. That's what's so horrible. It is unconscious.
It's unconscious to this day. People, I love social media because we can finally push back. If you look at Black movies and TV shows in 2021, and you talk about a female romantic lead, the new movie Marie and Malcolm with Zendaya and John David Washington. And I'm like, okay, it's cool, but couldn't they have did Marie have to be? And I'm not anti, but I also understand that with Hollywood and colorism, it's so prevalent. Some people aren't even conscious some Black people are like, what, TaRessa, why do you? I've been criticized for talking against colorism my whole life by Black people. They're like, do you have to keep bringing it up? You're obsessed. I'm like, and I am. I'm like, yes, I'm obsessed, and I'm going to keep bringing it up. And please forgive me, but this is why I'm here, and my ancestors are making me do this. But I've been literally like, I'm thrilled with these new conversations because I've literally been waiting 60 plus years for these conversations to take root and for us to be having them in public spaces in a sustained, analytical, critical way. With the solution is, can we get more equity? The solution is, we got Lupita, we got Viola Davis, we got Tika Sumpter. we want to show mixed race couples, but we also don't want to do that at the expense of ambiguously Black couples.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't help to lift me up if you the seesaw approach doesn't work. If for one person to be lifted, another has to be put
Right.
down.
Yes.
Okay, if
Yes.
for one person to be celebrated, someone else has to be denigrated. If for one person to win, somebody else has to lose. That's what we are that we're trying to get past that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right? So that there is more equity, so there is more representation in a way that is accurate, that is
Mm-hmm.
specific, that is realistic, and
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't pit us against each other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I love this. You just explained what identity equity is, advocate, identity equity advocate in action, like having those conversations, pointing it out, and saying why it matters. That's powerful. I think that's a huge part of our role. And Catherine and I, our mission is to publish diverse voices and celebrate diverse voices. And that's our mission. And that's what we're exalting stories to help educate and inspire and advance people of color and people with any kind of diversity in their story. And so we're doing that in our own way in a literary manner, and being vocal is so important even in those small settings, like you said, with among people, just keeping the conversation alive and explaining why it matters so much.
Exactly. And you guys, by the way, your work is beautiful. I still love
Thank
I
you.
think it was one of your early books was your mother's memoir.
Yes,
What
thank
was the
you.
title? What was the
The
title?
Triumph, I usually have it within reach. The Triumph of Rosemary, a memoir, and it's about how she was put up for adoption as a mixed race Italian and Black baby, adopted by a Black family. Then she married a white man, had us. People used to think she was the nanny, in public, and all kinds of stories. But what their love has no color, spirit has no color, and so hearts have no color. We love with our hearts and our minds, not our skin. And so they demonstrated that, and they taught that to us, and we now live that. And it's our mission. And I think our bodies and our appearances are a tool because it gets people talking. When I was on Montel Williams' show, he said it's the shock value of me when I announce that I'm Black, Italian, French, English, Native American, all of that, and proud of every bit of everything that I am, and just an advocate for everyone to embrace and celebrate who we are, but never forget the struggle. The struggle is so important. And if we have any perceived privilege, it's our responsibility to use that to advance others.
Thank you. I love that. I also, you just inspired a thought. When you said love has no color, heart has no color, spirit has no color, that is beautiful, powerful, and perfect. So when you went back to, you know, why is this important? You're completely correct. But we're born into this structure, this system, this matrix, if you want to call it that, that is completely defined by and obsessed with power based on race, identity. And, I love when people say race is a social construct. And my response is show me one aspect of social identity that's not. And race can be a social construct, but racism, again, drives and fuels this country. It drives and fuels every aspect of life, options, opportunities, quality of life, everything else, is completely dominated by that. And so I believe you've just gave me your beautiful description just gave me a powerful vision of heart and mind and spirit and love coming into this place and going, wow, this is not consistent with what I need in order to operate at my highest capacity. So I believe that people like you and I are aligned in using words and story and the voices and the platforms we're given, including our light skin privilege. I agree with you. For me, it's currency. How do you spend it? How are you going to spend
Ooh,
it? What are you going to invest it in? Right? What are you
wow.
going to invest it in? I mean, sure, you could use it and be in a slightly better position, but that's all you're going to have is a slightly better position. So, um, but I love that vision because you're right. We come here to love and to be evolved and to grow. And we're thrown into, like I like to call it, a matrix, and it's hostile and it's unfair. It's inhuman. It's really inhuman, right? And
Mhm.
inhumane. And then we're thrust into it. And I guess part of the spirit, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, is that we're born in this place and time, in these bodies and these identities and these places, to navigate it. And I believe we're also here, which is why I love the work that you and Catherine do as well. I believe we have a responsibility to do whatever we can with whatever we're given to try to make it better.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, for sure. But having the consciousness and the confidence, which is what you're instilling in the younger generation as an identity equity advocate, is so important. That's a starting point. You have to have that consciousness and confidence, which is what
Thank you.
you're doing.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
awesome.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm. So TaRessa, what's next? Like, what do you see yourself doing on this topic?
What's next? What I want to do next on this topic is to continue to write and speak and to align myself with others, including you. Now that the conversation about multiracial identity is public and
Mm-hmm.
ongoing
Mm-hmm.
and high profile,
Yeah.
again, this is really the first time in US history it's been all of those things, and it's not going to go away.
No.
You know, there's controversy in it, there's some conflict in it, but it's a necessary, healthy, timely conversation. I want to align myself with people like yourself
Mm-hmm.
who are of like mind about what we just talked about, what we just discussed, that we have a higher purpose. We're not here just for ourselves and self-aggrandizement. We're here because we understand, again, light skin privilege, LSP, currency. We understand the gifts we've been given, the access to spaces, to be published authors, to be able to be media personalities and influencers. But we're driven by a purpose beyond ourselves, and while being grounded in who we are and very clear about what we can bring. So I want to keep writing books. I want to go back to fiction.
Oh,
I am
okay.
not I am not a natural memoirist. Can I just tell you, this book kicked my writing behind, and I've been writing my whole life. Never has anything been this challenging. I
Why?
don't even I can't even keep a journal, and I sure wish that wasn't true the whole time I was writing. This book took me 5 years. Um,
Why
I'm
was
not a
it so
natural
hard?
memoirist. I'm not a natural memoirist. What I realized is it was, I didn't have any qualms about telling my story, but I really had to work hard to learn how to make it a story that read like a story, but was factual. Here were my advantages. I'm not a natural memoirist. I think some people are just natural memoirists, right? I'm not. It was a struggle, but I brought to bear the journalist in me and the novelist. So I tried to make a story, but when you have to make yourself a character, you're like, okay, that took like a year. Like, I mean, you're just kind of sitting there going, because we've had the gift of having written both, and
Right.
having quite frankly succeeded in both realms, journalism
Mm-hmm.
and fiction, and
Mm-hmm.
full-length fiction novels. So I was like, well, the journalist was, I brought in the census and the time and place, and people
Right.
really liked that, and I would have wanted that in a book. And then the novelist was like, I tried to give it some dramatic flow, and I tried to make people into characters. When it came to myself, how do you make yourself, you can't see yourself objectively. Listen, I'm gonna tell people, whatever is good about Swirl Girl, I give credit to my daughter, Mariah Stovall, who is now a literary agent, by the way, and an author of her own novel, who was an undergrad at the time. She gave me my first feedback on the book that was so on point. She gave me homework. I stopped writing for 6 months to take her
Oh.
advice completely. Oh no, it was brilliant. She was so on point. I did drafts, many revisions. I had amazing help, including 2 rounds of beta readers and great editors and proofreaders. That's what makes the book work. They kicked my behind, which I needed. I must have done 100 revisions, and I'm a rewriter. I love rewrites, and I was working really hard for it to be a good experience, for it to be entertaining, and engaging and all that. That took work.
Oh
The
my
only
God, I
reason I
feel
thought
exhausted.
I was But yeah, it was hard. It
Oh
was
my
hard
gosh.
work. It was hard work. I am not a, again, I believe there are people who are natural, like a Trevor Noah. I mean, his memoir is, of course, phenomenal, but he's one of the best just natural born storytellers of our time. The
Mm-hmm.
boy, he could talk about anything and you're
Mm-hmm.
laying on the floor,
Right.
right? He could probably order in a restaurant and you're like, oh my God, that's so genius. Like I've never heard, you know, he's just amazing. There are many other amazing people too, but anyway, his book was a bedrock for me. Mariah Carey's wasn't out. Hers is beautiful. I happen to be social media friends with Michaela Angela Davis, who wrote Mariah Carey's book. I shouted them out on Twitter. It was really sweet. That book is phenomenal. I don't know if you read it. Just
Mm-hmm.
beautifully, beautifully
Yeah,
done.
it is.
So I'm happy to say I count myself among them, even though I'm not famous like them, that there are now 3 mixed race memoirs out there that aren't about the tragic,
Love that so
that
much.
that represent our very different journeys, but as you talked about, both the commonalities of our journeys and the differences. Trevor Noah grew up in, I mean, I can't imagine growing up in apartheid South Africa where he couldn't go outside. He couldn't be seen with any of his parents or grandparents or cousins. And he was the only little light skin, and he was supposed to be in a different racial, social category and live in a different place. I mean, he had to be brought up incognito, right?
Yes, yeah, it's remarkable.
And then
Remarkable.
what was interesting about him was he learned to formulate and communicate his identity through languages.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm like, you are just beyond brilliant, sir. Right. But
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm not a natural memoir, so fiction. And I still want to explore these themes. I want to explore colorism. I want to explore mixed race identity. What I could tell you about the novel I'm just starting now is it really looks at light skin privilege, racial ambiguity, and gentrification.
Ooh, uh-oh,
Amazing.
another hot topic unto itself.
Unto itself, honey.
Woo!
Yes, and
Okay.
gentrification, but with through that lens of a character who's mixed race, who's very light skinned, who's racially ambiguous looking, and what does that mean in terms of her community being gentrified?
Wow, that's powerful because gentrification is a racial term.
It's a racial reality. It's a form of oppression. I mean, come on, it's all it is. I mean, you can dress it up and we can all enjoy the cool coffee shop or the fact that we can now get organic whatever, for $17 an ounce. And let's face it, but at the same point, the whole what gentrification really means is disruption, destruction, relocation. And it's never usually the Black and brown people who are the targets of it. They don't have usually any control or any tools with which to fight. It's not voluntary. It's being imposed upon them.
Correct.
So,
Yeah, displacement.
it's displacement. It's colonization 101, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that, it continues to happen. So I'm kind of playing. My goal through my creative works, Elizabeth, is to kind of play with these things, to these topics that I'm admittedly obsessed with. And I want other people to be obsessed with me. I want some company. But I want
am
people to be
too.
entertained. Yeah. I want
Yeah.
people to be entertained in the meanwhile. So.
Oh, see, that's the best way. That's the best vehicle to share your message because people are engaged. It's like that's why Trevor Noah is so successful because he's telling you some really bad news, but it's hilarious.
And brilliant. Not just hilarious, but he's so brilliant. You're like, oh, you're just amazing. Oh my God. Could I just borrow, could I have one cell from your brain? Just stick it in there. Yeah, exactly. So brilliant and hilarious, but brilliant. You're just like, okay, sir, I get it. But yes, like you're saying. So I think that, yes, that's a perfect description. I think that, that's what I want to play with creatively and also create, like all writers of when I create fiction, or somebody said my memoir should be a movie. I'm like, oh, let's see.
Oh, it should. Oh my gosh, TaRessa, the whole jazz baby. I mean, there's so many images that are just so fun and so perfect, like cinematic. Do it. Do it. I
I'm
hope
going to
you,
do it.
I
You know
want to
what? I'm
see,
going to do it. Thank you for the encouragement.
I
But
want to see your
yes.
movie. I'll be first
Okay.
in line.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. I love
Yay.
it. I love it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, TaRessa, beautiful. You're amazing. I love you so much. I'm so honored that you're sharing your wisdom and your viewpoints and your trailblazing identity equity advocate title that you just coined, made up yourself. I just love that. And that you're a bluish boomer and a flower power, what was
Black
that
power
one?
flower child.
Black
Black
power
power flower
flower
child.
child.
It's true.
I
And I
love
use it and a jazz baby. Like these are all my little tags, right? But like who is this crazy woman? But
You're amazing,
yes.
TaRessa.
Oh, as
Amazing.
are you. And you continue, you as you said, I've known you since you were a baby, basically. And just to have watched you blossom and flourish and to keep and everything you do, I don't know if your viewers know this and listeners, but in everything you do, you have always worked really brilliantly to elevate, whether it's a conversation or a concept, you're always reaching up. You're always aiming higher. You never rest and say, okay, well, I've done that. It's like she's doing what to the boss up, huh? You know, I mean, everything you've done, one day I want you to write your memoir because I think in addition to the mixed race part and all those other things, I think it's an extraordinary, just because I've known you your basically most of your adult life and we've been in touch and had been blessed to work together. Um, that you've had great visibility, Oprah, Montel, et cetera, on various topics, and every single thing you do is about evolution. You're an evolution goddess. You're an evolution goddess. That's what I want to leave with you. Like I always know whatever Elizabeth's doing it's done in a way that's designed to take everybody higher with love
Oh my
and with
gosh.
elegance. And you always bring the beauty and the sensuality and the spirituality, and I think they've always been synthesized within you, so that for some people those things, the sensuality and the spirituality, are very separate. And you, ever since I met you, they've always been just completely synthesized. And I think that's just who you are.
Wow, TaRessa. Wow. Wow. That's the mission of Boss Up Goddess.
I love it. I
And
want a t-shirt, by the way. This is my Good Trouble John Lewis t-shirt. I'm in Georgia.
ooh, I
But
love it.
yes, but I want you. I was thinking as I was getting ready for tonight, where's your merch, girl?
Oh,
T-shirt, coffee
it's
mug.
yeah, yeah. So it's this show is inspired by my book that's coming out this spring called Boss Up Goddess. And it is a memoir, but more like the tools I've used, learned to get through difficult things, the racial identity struggle, the terrible divorce, weight struggle with food and fat that I had, and other things. And so it's to teach other women how to use the tools I've used to excel and ascend.
See, I just said
You
evolution
sure
goddess.
did. You
By the
nailed
way,
it.
when it comes out, I want to find ways on the platforms that I work in. I don't have my own talk show yet, but that I work in, to be able to help promote your book. So, and I want
Oh,
merch. I want t-shirt. I want coffee mug.
okay. Thank you, TaRessa.
Okay. Absolutely.
I'm on that. I'm on that. Yes. And
Yes.
the
I think your
colors.
fans will too.
Okay. Okay.
What are the
Excellent.
colors? What are the colors?
Oh, it's very, it's this. This is my cover.
Oh, let me see your cover.
So,
Authors, we always geek out about book covers. Oh,
right. And the
it's going to be a
tagline is
bestseller.
start living your effing potential, but
Yes.
effing can stand for what you think at first, but it can also mean
Fulfilling, free,
fascinating, fulfilling.
fulfilling.
Yes, you fill it in.
Yes.
Whatever works for you.
Oh,
So the
oh,
colors are
I'm
like,
so excited.
thank you, purple, pink, like really vibrant. So you are going to get the first t-shirt.
Yes, and I want to help you promote the book in whatever ways I can amplify it.
Thank you, TaRessa. Thank you
Yeah,
so
my
much.
pleasure, sweetheart.
Oh my gosh, I love you so much.
I
Thank
love you
you.
too. Together again.
Yes, well, we will have to have another conversation because obviously we could talk for 10 hours straight on these topics because it's our passion and our purpose. And so I think everybody should read Swirl Girl because it's fascinating. You learn history, you learn a unique perspective, clearly the trailblazing vision and mission that TaRessa Stovall has as an identity equity advocate. We can all learn from her, as you saw during the past hour. So TaRessa, thank you so much for joining me here on Boss Up Goddess.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, with your goddessy self. And thank you to everybody watching and listening. We love you and we want you to boss on up.
Thank you, TaRessa. Thank you. So,
Absolutely.
yes, we will see you again here another time. And all of you, please do read Swirl Girl. And thank you for joining us tonight on Boss Up Goddess. I'm Elizabeth Ann Atkins, and I want you to remember that you have the power. I'll see you next time.